Tonight on 20 to 1, we're counting down 20 moments that stopped Australia.
The winner is Sydney, Australia.
We've got great sporting moments.
It's gone for it. There it is.
National celebrations, modern miracles, and some giant leaps for mankind.
Good evening and welcome to 20 to 1, Moments That Stopped Australia. I'm Bud Tingle. We have 20 truly remarkable moments that shaped Australia for you tonight, starting at number 20 with the race that stops a nation.
Racing in the cup. The great man, Makybe Diver, jumped away. Makybe Diver going to the second half of the field, but has already got over him. Runs to second, on his own, runs on, but a champion becomes a legend. Makybe Diver has won it.
The biggest day in Australia is Melbourne Cup Day. It was the first race that captured attention of the whole community, and it's the only race in the world that's where the whole country stops. I mean, there's 99% of Australians who have an interest in or listen to or watch or have a sweep or a bet on the Melbourne Cup. What that other 1% are doing, I don't know.
Look, it's a uniquely Australian thing, and I'm not too sure why. It probably says a lot about Australia, but I'm not too sure what it is that it says.
Cheers. The women's fashions are nice. I like the hats. The women's hats, I've always liked that. I go there and they wear these weird hats, like a block of flats on their head.
When I was young, Melbourne Cup was the most glamorous event of the year. We would dress up in the most outrageous clothes and get the tram out to Flemington and have the best day being photographed with crazy hats, crazy outfits, the whole thing.
Mr. Celebrity lined up into the gates.
Melbourne Cup Day, I bet on everything. It's the one day of the year that I'm a maniac. I think I'm going to back a winner, so I normally do because I put $1 on every horse that's running in the darn race.
If you're a gambler, and who isn't come race day, it's useful to know that the favourite has only won 32 times in 143 years. But that was before Makybe Diver.
But a champion becomes a legend. Makybe Diver has won it.
There has never been a moment in the history of the great race like this.
It's just ingrained in our culture. You can try and explain it, but it doesn't really matter. It's just in there. The horse and the Melbourne Cup in Australia, they're one.
At 19, now, when I say elite sportsman, you automatically think of a 61-year-old potato farmer wearing gumboots, don't you?
Sometimes you have events that sort of tickle a nation's funny bone or something grabs their attention, and with Cliff Young, it appealed to us on so many different levels.
And he used to run in gumboots. He was the worst dressed sports person we've ever had. These days, of course, Nike would have been there getting very special slick gumboots.
Cliff Young was, as his name suggested, young at heart. He embodied the never-say-die attitude many aspire to, but few achieve.
What the interesting thing about Cliff Young is that he wanted to do it, and it was remarkable what he did. I mean, he didn't cheat, he actually did it.
Oh, it's been a pretty tough run. The hills all the way to here, anyway.
And day after day, Cliffy Young, the Cliff Young Shuffle, and the whole nation fell in love with him.
Incredibly, at age 61, Cliff became the oldest marathon winner, and he took 2 days off the previous Sydney to Melbourne race record.
Do you think that you're going to make it all the way?
Oh, yeah, for sure. I'm going to run all night tonight, and I hope to finish tomorrow night sometime.
And he streeted the field, he just ripped them wide open. Kept going to Melbourne. If they hadn't stopped him, he would have finished in Perth.
Cliff was awarded the first prize of $10,000. He promptly gave $2,000 to each of the 5 other runners and kept nothing for himself. An impressive and generous man, that Cliff.
Cliff, would you do it again? Would you do it again? Oh, no, I don't think so.
Time now to look into some secret women's business and a national institution, the Women's Weekly. The first issue of Women's Weekly claimed to embrace a new independent mood amongst women, aligning itself with women's rights whilst presenting traditional articles on fashion, recipes and social issues. The Women's Weekly immediately went on to become the country's most popular newsprint magazine.
I was raised on that magazine. We have had a subscription to that magazine for my entire life. I can definitely say that.
What should you men do when a woman offers to shake hands? Find out in our guide on etiquette.
It was such a wonderful magazine. People don't realise today that the Weekly was fundamentally a news magazine. And prior to the advent of television, and certainly prior to colour television, most Australians got their news out of the Women's Weekly. If there was a big event, the Women's Weekly had it in colour.
It's an amazing institution. It's a fantastic magazine to work for because you go back and you just kind of get a history of Australia through the pages of the Weekly.
Plan your perfect kitchen from 5 designs that work.
And who is the girl most likely to marry Prince Charles?
I'm very good at doing this. Out now.
1972 was a very good year for Ita Buttrose and for the launch of a new magazine called Cleo, short for Cleopatra.
What's in Cleo magazine for you this month? Plenty.
Do you think women really want to look at male news?
Yes.
And so it was reflecting that generational change, and it was very timely. And who would have thought that someone like Ita Buttrose, who to this day remains this wonderful moral icon, would bring out a nude centrefold? It was quite shocking.
The centrefold, I think it was everybody who's anybody did the centrefold. There was, Skyhooks did it, Johnny Raper, Barry Humphries. I mean, it was really every male star in Australia.
Call me a prude, but there are some things that I just don't want to see. And Jack Thompson in the Nuddy is one of them.
At 17, it's Australia's first royal wedding.
Well, I was in Copenhagen in Denmark for the wedding, and I'd been privileged to have one of the very few interviews with them at the announcement of their engagement. So has the girl from Tasmania tamed the Turbo Prince?
In a certain way, yes.
Mary and Frederick courted for 3 years and announced their engagement in September of 2003.
And then being in Copenhagen for the event was fantastic because there was such a great air of celebration and fun and two nations coming together.
Oh, the romance to touch all women's hearts. I think, like almost every other woman in Australia, I was glued to the television watching the wedding. Oh, we all loved it when he cried. Don't think we didn't all notice, because as I said to the woman in the cheese shop, did you see he cried? Oh, yes, he did.
When his eyes welled up with tears, all the girls in the room burst into tears. And the first thing out of my mouth was, can you hear that? That's the sound of every heart in Australia breaking.
A part of me, like most women in Australia, was crying, it should have been me.
I faderens og søndens og Helligåndens navn. Amen.
But the actual day, it came down to two people, and despite the hugeness of it, it was a really lovely moment. Obviously, two people in love. It was very stylish and it was very sentimental.
I just think it shows you that really at heart we're all romantics. And I think women still somewhere deep in their hearts yearn for a prince. We just love that happy ending.
Still to come on 20 to 1, moments that stopped Australia.
Taking his helmet off, he was dripping with sweat and he said, I'm enjoying myself.
Everybody in the street was down at our place. It was very exciting.
But I came to see that this was one courageous, one extraordinary woman.
I mean, isn't it great to be an Aussie?
The schoolboy and his teacher.
It was wrong. What I did was wrong.
He was 15.
I just went for it.
She was...
Welcome back to 20 to 1 Moments That Stopped Australia. Tonight, we count down 20 pivotal and significant events in Australian history. At 16, Australians switched on their televisions on September the 16th, 1956, and for the first time ever, there was actually something on.
From Channel 9 comes the first television program in Australia. Station TCN presents This is Television.
I remember the night, September 16, just happens to be my birthday. And I was sitting there in a place in Sydney watching Bruce Gyngell. It was just extraordinary.
This is television. Good evening and welcome to television.
And television absolutely captured the Australian imagination right from the moment that Bruce Gyngell uttered those words.
Good evening and welcome to television.
You'd see people standing in streets looking at television sets played in shop windows. Dad was too mean to have television, so we were relegated to standing outside the television shop, a little speaker up the top there.
Make life a happy-go-lucky journey.
You'd watch this. You had to watch the one channel, and no remotes. You had to use your legs. That is the bits below your pelvis. And we watched the television there. We watch anything, the ads.
Little weed to fly, I'm little weed to fly, straight from rubbish tip to you.
It was amazing. It was like Big Brother, but only entertaining. That sort of thing.
Frame up 1, pan left, camera 2, follow, focus and dolly in. All right, cue him.
Back then, how television worked was a mystery to most Australians. No one really knew about electromagnetic waves, unlike today, where it's common knowledge.
My mother had got a television on hire purchase. You know, she was paying it off. And I seem to remember Dad was a bit shocked that she'd done this. You know, his fathers often are. And everybody in the street was down at our place. You know, it was very exciting. We thought television was very exciting.
The early days were a time of many firsts. Graham Kennedy and Don Lane joined Melbourne and Sydney audiences by coaxial cable.
There were more than 1,000 reeds springing up like weeds. There were
Over the past 50 years, we've seen many great TV shows from both home and abroad.
But our take-up of television back then was red hot. It just took off. And thank goodness, it's still here too.
At 15, it's Jimmy Carruthers. Jimmy gave us our first world boxing title in 1952 when he took on South African Vic Taville.
He represented Australia in the Olympics in 1948. But 52 was a special year, special moment for Australian boxing on an international scale. He was only in his early 20s, snowy-haired, young, good-looking man, and he went into the ring against Tawil, certainly as the underdog.
A wild, desperate swing is as near as the champion ever came to landing a single blow.
As soon as he got into the ring, he got Tawil into the ropes and he let fly, and then from that moment on, he just was a barrage of punches, one after the other, just let go.
As a world champion draws on his last reserves of pluck and willpower to be 1 in a million who could have climbed back.
When Jimmy Carruthers, the Australian, in 139 seconds, threw 147 punches, left, right, bang, bang, Vic Tawil down. It was unbelievable, all over in just over 2 minutes.
Going to South Africa and winning this fight, which just once again seemed so hard to achieve. And he became world champion, and he came back to the country, and the adulation, he was on the front page of the newspapers, he was everywhere.
Friends, relatives and the public add their welcome as the new champ shapes up to the microphones.
Well, Australia, I'm pleased and proud to be the first Australian ever to fight and win the world's title.
Champion of the world for boxing, wasn't it great? I mean, isn't it great to be an Aussie?
At 14, you won't find a greater Aussie moment than the extension of public drinking hours. 6 p.m. closing in pubs was originally introduced during World War I and led to what became known as the 6 o'clock swill. The end of World War II was supposed to bring an end to the 6 o'clock swill, But patrons in New South Wales, Victoria and South Australia continued to have the bar close early, which gave most workers barely an hour to get their day's drinking done.
Yeah, it was good, the 6 o'clock till, yeah. I was around for that. You'd get in there and you'd order 5 or 6 schooners at 5 to 6 and try to chug like them before they kicked you out at about 10 past or 20 past 6, depending where you were. And then came 10 o'clock closing, a revolution.
February the 1st, 1955 is BE Day, Beer in the Evening Day. And there is much rejoicing in the land.
There should be a statue of a bloke leaning up against a wall, sort of urinating on himself. And that's, you know, celebrating the extending of trading hours for pubs. I think it's fantastic.
After-hours liquor will no longer be the almost exclusive privilege of those who can afford to go to nightclubs.
So you had the public bar, which was men only, and then you had the ladies' parlour, where you had the drunk ladies with those skinny legs with sores on who'd sit there drinking sherry, smoking Craven A&R cigarettes.
They had started to have, which was a big thing in those days, beer gardens. You know, and you take your wife or your girlfriend into these lovely beer gardens and you could have a few drinks and relax, and then you have to be closed at, finish at 10 o'clock.
And of course, with more women folk joining their partners in the evening, drinking was regulated and restricted in the way it should be, by the missus. At 13, it's the remarkable Kay Cotty, the first woman to sail solo, non-stop and unassisted around the world.
Why are you doing it?
It's been a lifelong ambition to do some major sailing. This is the highest mountain there is to climb.
Kay built and paid for her yacht, First Lady, and set off on her 23,000 nautical mile voyage.
I think that it grabbed the attention of the entire nation was when Kay Cotty, in this basically it was pretty much a cork with a sail put on top, bobbing around the ocean, and somehow, as the nation watched and sort of got daily updates, where is she now, she kept going until she went right round the whole damn earth.
After 189 days at sea, Kay Cotty cruised into Sydney Harbour and into the record books and was greeted by thousands and thousands of well-wishers.
My memory of Kay Cotty is a young, pretty girl who was on a boat sailing around the world, and I remember thinking, why? Well, I have to say that it's been rough conditions. You've had your 34th birthday on your own. Has it been worth it, Kay? Over?
Well, I've had a couple of months of pretty rough weather getting this far, and the worst part, I think, was looking at the icebergs in the rough weather. Over.
Why on earth would she want to do this? But I came to see that this was one courageous, one extraordinary woman.
Kay Cotty, hey, what an inspiration. And for me as a father of 3 young daughters at the time, it was just magic to be able to say, look, the world's your oyster, girls. Get out there, go after it, because you can do anything you want to do in life.
Still to come on 20 to 1, moments that stopped Australia.
Suddenly, an officer galloped forward, brandishing a glittering sword, and he slashed the ribbon.
The closest the country has ever come to unrest on the streets and worse.
Australia is the best place in the world. And the rest of the world finds it difficult to argue.
This is Mahi, aged 11, before his face became paralysed. Will he smile again?
9 News at 6.
Welcome back to 20 to 1. Moments that stopped Australia. Let's look back at what we've seen so far in tonight's show.
At 20, it's the race that truly does stop Australia. At 19, Cliff Young shuffles his way into the record books. At 18, it's the weekly and, well, the nutty. At 17, it's our Mary and an Australian royal wedding. At 16, Bruce Gingell welcomed us to television. At 15, Jimmy Carruthers punched his way into the record books. At 14, it was last drinks for the 6 o'clock swill. And at 13, Kay Cotty knocked us out with her nautical prowess. Foreign nations have introduced many memorable things to our country. The cane toad, the prickly pear, Damir Dokic, but one of the less dangerous additions to the ecosystem was surfing. It was the summer of 1915 when the aquatic Hawaiian Duke Kahanamoku first visited Australia as a guest of the New South Wales Swimming Association.
It was eventually going to happen because we all live on the beach, but it was great that he set it up and started a whole culture here in this country.
And he came out here and he carved this extraordinary piece of sugar pine into a 14-foot board and went out to freshwater to give a demonstration of how you could ride the board. And of course, everyone on the beach, and there were thousands on the beach, were fascinated by it.
I used to surf at Freshie a lot in the earlier times, and this is where the Duke actually rode in. And yet some bloke jumps on a log and comes in with the foam around him, stands up and then bows to the crowd. Absolutely wonderful, and of course, an incredibly important historical moment because our connection with the sea as Aussies is profound, whether we're real good at it or whether we're just going out for fun on the weekends, whether we're hanging around at the water's edge or whether we're trying to take on the bigger stuff.
Of course, surfing is now simply part of Aussie culture, and we produce some of the finest surfers of both sexes in the world.
On waves to suit the big occasion, Beachley showed why she's been unbeatable for so long.
And I think it's helped us psychologically as a nation, frankly, and the Duke was one of the people that got us on the wave.
At number 11, we go all the way back to 1932 and the opening of the Sydney Harbour Bridge.
It was March 19th. More than 200,000 Sydneyites and visitors converged on the structure, conceived by Australian Dr. J. Bradfield and built by Dorman Long of England at a cost of £9 million.
The Sydney Harbour Bridge was 118 years in the making. It took only 8 years to build, but required 110 years of important bureaucratic wrangling over what shape it should be. In 1924, construction was finally underway.
Back in the 30s, they didn't have all the fancy laser technology, but nevertheless, as they built it, it came together perfectly. And when they took off the tension rod at the end, everything just sort of went click, and they just put the rivets through and it worked perfectly.
The Sydney Harbour Bridge opened amidst controversy, high drama and farce.
The Premier's decision to open the Harbour Bridge himself brought bitter resentment from a section of the community who had clamoured for a royal performance. Lang replied in his own blunt way, "I will open it myself. It'll be cheaper."
At the precise moment that the Labor Party Premier of New South Wales, Jack Lang, was about to cut the ribbon,
suddenly an officer galloped forward, brandishing a glittering sword and shouting, "In the name of common decency, I declare this bridge open." He slashed the ribbon. Irish-born Major Francis de Groot had beaten Lang to the punch with perfect split-second timing. He was dragged from his horse by the then chief of the CIB, Superintendent Bill Mackay.
But he strode in on his horse and he slashed the ribbon. I thought that was a bit wonderful. I don't know who... Never heard much about him after that, de Groot. I don't know what he did after that. He's like, one-hit wonder, really.
After de Groot had been hustled away, the ribbon was quickly rejoined. Lang snipped the ribbon, and the bridge was officially open. A remarkable scene which may never be repeated.
I love the fact it's so 30s in that sort of industrial style. Yeah, I love the design of it, and I love the fact that we're so blasé about it, that we run fireworks off it at every major event, who else does that with a national icon?
At number 10, it's the biggest birthday celebration this country has ever seen, Australia's bicentennial.
Let's make it great. You can do it. 88. Come on, give us a hand.
200 years ago, 11 convict ships sailed through Sydney Heads. Thieves, murderers, prostitutes, petty crims, swimming coaches, we got the lot come in, okay?
I think I was 14 years old, and
I was either on North Head or some headland watching the tall ships coming in and out of the harbour.
January 26th, 1988 was an Australian first, a public holiday held around the nation on the same day for the first time ever.
But I just remember thinking, wow, 200 years, that's really old. And then since then I've travelled the world and realised we're really young.
The bicentennial celebrations commemorated the anniversary of the First Fleet's arrival in Port Jackson on January 26, 1788. 2.5 million people attended the celebrations in Sydney, and notable guests of honour included Prince Charles and Princess Diana.
Australia is the best place in the world, and the rest of the world finds it difficult to argue.
200 years later, us. We got the best doctors, lawyers, psychologists, swimmers, you name it, and we're up there amongst the best in the world, you know?
And didn't our magnificent Socceroos prove that with last night's thrilling must-win victory against Uruguay?
Tight the spaces. Here's Harry Kewell. It's still there. And it's in! Australia have scored!
It's huge.
Let's face it, if you're talking about stopping a nation, our 20-1 countdown simply must include last night's thrilling, heart-stopping soccer triumph in extra time.
Saved by Schwarzer! He's done it again! In the shootout, Mark Schwarzer is the hero for Australia.
It's a massive save.
It's Vidmar.
Beautiful.
It's beautifully put
Good
away.
on you, son.
And suddenly, the goal of Germany and the World Cup were in sight.
Oh, great save again by Schwarzer!
Huge save!
Wonderful save! Here's Aloisi for a place in the World Cup.
For us.
He scored! Australia have done it!
Come on!
John Aloisi, the Confederations Cup hero, has done it! This is a team from every community in Australia. It's our team, and our team are going to the World Cup.
Still to come on 20-1.
It was fantastic. It was euphoria.
It was wonderful theatre. You know, you can't choreograph that sort of thing.
Girls screaming, biting their lips, tearing their hair out, not being able to believe the ecstasy of what they were doing.
National Line Newsbreak, brought to you by Nissan's end-of-year clearance. Hurry,
with 20% off all footwear. That's the latest women's, men's and kids' styles at 20% off. So this Christmas, step straight into Kmart.
To solve an ancient mystery,
King Solomon's mines are a part of ancient history.
you turn to the experts.
Why do you think African tribes would be interested in King Solomon's mines?
This Friday, a premiere television event.
The one who holds the stone rules all of Africa.
Every clue, every secret brings them closer to the greatest discovery under the sun. Patrick Swayze. You ready? King Solomon's Mines, 8:30 Friday on 9.
Welcome back to 20-1, Moments That Stopped Australia. Tonight, we count down 20 pivotal and significant events in Australian history. Number 9. Do you remember where you were in the early hours of Friday, the 24th of September, 1993?
And the winner is Sydney, Australia.
The moment was great, and I thought, oh, this is just incredible television. You know, it was fantastic. It was euphoria.
And I remember hearing all the neighbours up and down the streets screaming and shouting and out the window calling. You know, it was 4 a.m, so it was a terrific time.
Australia had beaten main rival Beijing by the narrowest of margins after lots of lobbying by our pollies.
We're just all thrilled. So it's been coming for a long, long time because you can wish for all you want. You've still got to make it work.
I think we campaigned well, but I think in the end the popularity of Australia really got us there.
Paul Keating was Prime Minister. They got 107 delegates from the International Olympic Committee who are going to vote, put them down there at the Park Hyatt. They've got them in a conference room, beautiful sparkling day outside, the curtains are closed. Keating stands up, presses a button on the podium, the curtains go back. There is the Opera House, the seagulls, the ferries, the hydrofoils, the people. And Keating's opening remark is, there you go. That ain't no Beijing city.
The winner is Sydney.
I have to admit, I had mixed feelings being a Melburnian. I was really, really jealous. You know, I totally understood it later on why Sydney won it. They put on a great campaign and it worked brilliantly. And the 2000 Olympics were a fantastic event.
During the Olympic Games, there was a vibe in Sydney. Somehow the sun never stopped shining, people never stopped smiling. There was such a feeling of goodwill that all the world had come together as one.
The 2000 Sydney Olympics were definitely our best ever, with a haul of 58 medals, including a record 16 gold.
I am proud and happy to proclaim that you have presented to the world the best Olympic Games ever.
Long before Deltamania, there was Beatlemania. The Fab Four visited in June of 1964 and made the whole nation twist and shout.
I mean, you look back at them and you just think, what was happening back in the mid-60s where young girls were turned into that sort of beast.
It's interesting because when the Beatles sang, you couldn't hear them. It was like a tsunami. It was the first wave of pop culture, girls screaming, biting their lips, tearing their hair out, not being able to believe the ecstasy of what they were doing.
My mum, she cried, and from what she told me, it was like the whole school was crying, just because the Beatles landed in Australia. So I don't know whether we've all just, got hold of our senses a bit more these days.
The Beatles arrived in Darwin from Hong Kong for a brief stop before flying on to Sydney, where they landed during a torrential rainstorm. Must have made them feel right at home. The Beatles went on to play to over 200,000 screaming, adoring fans in Sydney, Melbourne, Brisbane and Adelaide.
The Beatles in Australia is a powerful memory, but I think that it's sort of, to me, it's tinged with sadness because I look at it and I think, isn't it sad that that will never happen again?
Probably a good thing, actually, that level of hysteria will never be reached again.
January the 3rd, 2003. Steve Waugh was doing it tough.
We loudmouth sports journos had been into Steve Waugh for about 18 months saying, look, it's time, it must be time that Steve Waugh goes now. Everybody had been criticising him.
I think you've got to keep yourself on edge and sharp and alert, but you don't want to put too much pressure on yourself.
You know, I mean, we all knew that he was going to retire, but over the years I've seen many great sportsmen who don't get to retire on their terms.
A direct hit, he's gone. I'd suggest you don't see Steve Waugh struggle and then dive if he knows he's not in trouble.
And he came out and it was a sparkling afternoon. Sydney Cricket Ground, the shadows are starting to lengthen, the seagulls are starting to look, where are we going to nest for the night?
Perhaps the luckiest fan at the SCG on the day was TV presenter Andrew Denton. He had won, via an auction, the privilege of serving the team drinks as honorary 12th man.
I actually got to take the drinks out in the final session as Steve was in his 40s. And I'm standing there in the middle of the SCG, full crowd, the sense of history. Steve's batting really well, a big innings needed. And I'm standing there thinking, well, what's the protocol here? I don't know, are you meant to say something? So as I left, I just said, don't be home before 6.
Steve Waugh on 98.
I was there, and the last ball of the day, he needs 4 runs to hit a century. In his last, it's just unbelievable.
day to remember for 41,000 fans. One ball remaining. Steve Waugh on 98. It's gone for it. There it is. A great moment in the history of Australian Test cricket.
It was wonderful theatre, you know, the final moment of the day, and you get your century. You can't choreograph that sort of thing. You just don't get the exit that you want all the time. I was happy for his century, but I was more happy for the fact that he left the way he wanted to leave.
Still to come on 20 to 1, moments that stopped Australia.
And in my time, I don't think we've ever had a greater sporting victory than that one.
It's just so hard to believe that somebody could have done it. So exciting.
You would walk along the street wanting to hug, to kiss, to smile, to talk to everybody around you.
Still gives me goosebumps.
Next week on 9, everything is huge. Sunday, the Great Celebrity Overhaul finale.
I'm so excited!
Then a massive CSI event by Quentin Tarantino with a CSI buried alive. Monday, a huge millionaire special.
Mummy wants to be a millionaire!
Tuesday, Frasier's final farewell.
Wish me luck.
Wednesday, the McLeod's final.
It tells me if I'm a McLeod or not.
Is a dream come true.
Do you know how much I love you?
Thursday, a supersized getaway with Megan Gale. And Saturday, a truly magical premiere.
Harry Potter.
And the Chamber of Secrets. A massive week next week on 9.
It's Woolworths Liquor Premium Beer Sale, where you can get premium savings on these cartons of 24 bottles for one low price.
Welcome back to 20 to 1, moments that stopped Australia. Tonight, we count down 20 pivotal and significant events in Australian history. On the 26th of September 1983, Australia comes from behind to win the America's Cup. Australia too crossed the finish line just 48 seconds ahead of the United States defender Liberty.
Australia too is by the line and the boat goes. There it is, she wins. Australia too has won the America's Cup.
And suddenly we've broken the longest winning streak in sporting history.
That was probably the greatest sporting thing that in our lifetime that we've had so far. 132 years, we hadn't won it. We beat the Yanks, we smashed them.
The crew absolutely elated there. They can't believe what's just happened. The America's Cup is Australia's.
It was a shining moment of we're taking on the Americans at something they really care about, and we're bloody well better than they are.
It was the longest winning streak in sporting history, and if anyone came close to challenging them, the American establishment would simply change the rules. It took an Australian team, bankrolled by Alan Bond and skippered by John Bertrand, to break America's 132-year grip on the Cup.
This is the bolt that's kept the Cup in place for 132 years.
When we won it, Bondi did the great hey, and they lifted the boat out of the water, and everyone for the first time saw this amazing winged keel.
And we were really into it. And in my time, I don't think we've ever had a greater sporting victory than that one. The great shining moment of cop this.
3, 2, 1. 0. All engine running. Liftoff. We have a liftoff. Liftoff on Apollo 11.
July 20, 1969. The world stops to watch man walk on the moon.
Tranquility Base here. The Eagle has landed. It's one small step for man. One giant leap for mankind.
I'm fascinated by the moon. It was so overwhelming. We're just little human beings and these people are on the moon. No cheese was the first report. Isn't that terrific? Oh, there was no cheese on the moon.
It has a stark beauty all its own. It's like much of the high desert of the United States. It's different, but it's very pretty out here.
And I was, I think, 16 at the time, herded into this science laboratory to watch man set foot on the moon, and we were all mesmerised.
I remember going outside and looking up at the moon. Now, I don't know what I expected to see when I looked up at the moon, but you just look at it and you think, isn't it amazing?
Beautiful view. Isn't that something? Magnificent sight out here.
And I never realised when I was sitting in that classroom watching Neil Armstrong take those famous steps that our satellite dish in Parkes was playing such a vital role in getting those pictures out around the world.
The shots of Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin on the moon were beamed live to 600 million people, thanks to Australia.
And we're getting a picture on the TV.
There's someone up there on the moon. I mean, it was just so hard to believe that somebody could have done it. So exciting.
Yes, indeed. They've got the flag up now, and you can see the stars and stripes on the lunar flag up now. That's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind.
Number 4. Political announcements rarely provoke outbreaks of widespread public emotion. One that did was Prime Minister Ben Chifley's radio announcement that the Second World War had come to an end.
Fellow citizens, the war is over. The Japanese government has accepted the terms of surrender imposed by the Allied nations, and hostilities will now cease.
World War II had raged for almost 6 years and cost more than 50 million lives, including 39,000 Australians.
The enemy had been blasted up into the trees.
It's hard to speculate about what it must have felt like. Emotional hardship, people's families, fathers, brothers, sons, away at war. Just imagine it must have been an extraordinary time.
Japan's surrender to Allied forces on August 15, 1945, ended World War II. Crowds across Australia cheered with relief and celebrated in the streets.
I couldn't imagine that you would walk along the street without wanting to hug, to kiss, to smile, to talk to everybody around you at that time, because there would have been this collective joy that must have been so extraordinary. And this whole feeling of a new beginning.
In Sydney, one iconic image became synonymous with the end of the war. That's of a man dancing down Elizabeth Street.
And I think the picture of the dancing man celebrating the end of World War II is something that's burnt into the memory and the mind of pretty well every Australian.
No one knows for certain the identity of the dancing guy, and it's such an iconic piece of footage. The two blokes in particular have stuck their hand up and gone, I am dancing guy. One of them is a fitter and the other is a QC. I've got my money on who's going to win that argument, just quietly.
Up next on 20 to 1, the top 3 moments that stopped Australia.
Our expose is putting this man behind bars, and he doesn't like it one bit.
I'll smash it now.
RPA.
This program brought to you by Simple. Now, caring for a sensitive skin is simple.
Welcome back to 20 to 1, moments that stopped Australia. At number 3, it's the most dramatic political event in the history of federation.
Well, may we say, God save the Queen. Because nothing will save the Governor-General.
You could never forget November 11, 1975.
It was 1:10. I was in the non-members' dining room.
And somebody rushed in and said, Kerr's just sacked Whitlam. Still gives me goosebumps.
And I just didn't believe it, but you sat for a couple of seconds, and then whilst it sunk through the head.
And the next thing, chairs, cards were going everywhere.
And everyone raced out to the front steps of Parliament House, and a few moments later Whitlam appeared there and made the incredible speech.
Who will undoubtedly go down in Australian history from Remembrance Day 1975 as Kerr's Kerr.
The closest the country has ever come to unrest on the streets and worse was the dismissal.
The Whitlam Labor government came to office in 1972 on the back of the phenomenally successful ad campaign It's Time. And, evidently, it was time, and the end of 23 years of Conservative rule.
Well, I mean, Gough Whitlam was enormously popular. He was a terrific public speaker. He had great charisma.
And I know that a lot of people voted for Whitlam when he became Prime Minister because he said to all of us, you know, it's okay to be Australian, it's okay to be proud. And we felt this national pride that he whipped up in us.
Men and women of Australia, think again how it was when you elected us in 1972.
Gough Whitlam won a second term in 1974, but Labor failed to win control of the Senate. As a result, supply bills were blocked and Australia became locked in a constitutional stalemate that led to the dramatic dismissal.
Given under my hand and the Great Seal of Australia on the 11th of November 1975 by His Excellency's command, Malcolm Fraser, Prime Minister, John R. Kerr, Governor-General. God save the Queen.
Well, may we say, God save the Queen.
To hear Whitlam's resonant tones echoing across the landscape, you knew that whatever the outcome of the next election was, and in fact Mr Fraser became the Prime Minister, people would never forget this moment.
Had he gone on the steps and said, I don't accept this, I am still the Prime Minister, God knows what would have happened.
Number 2, it's Stuart Diver, sole survivor of the 1997 Thredbo landslide.
Good morning and welcome to the program, coming to you this morning from the Thredbo ski village, the scene of yesterday's tragic collapse of 2 ski lodges.
He is one of the most significant days of my professional life, without question.
Massive explosion, like a bomb going off. Within 5 seconds, everything had collapsed.
Late at night on the 30th of July 1997, a section of the ski village of Thredbo was destroyed when a leaking water main triggered an avalanche that levelled 2 ski lodges and buried 19 people under a mountain of debris.
No one believed that anyone could possibly survive. We did 2 hours of watching them drag, mattresses and things out of the rubble and waiting to hear if there was anyone alive in there and not hearing any sounds. And every now and again, all the construction work would stop on the hill and they'd listen because they'd hear something, or they thought they heard something. And we'd all tense up on the other side.
Well, here at Thredbo, that real palpable sense of gloom has changed to one of optimism.
Well, I was in Thredbo at the time when we got the news that voices had been heard beneath the rubble. And it's really quite hard to describe how amazing that moment was, because being there, living through that cold and seeing those people searching beneath that complete devastation, there's no way I believe that anyone could survive that.
And it's one of the most dramatic bits of footage I've ever seen. It must have been about 5 o'clock or 5:30 in the afternoon. The whole nation was watching and we were watching, and then suddenly there was sort of a bit of a movement and we saw a bare foot come out.
Yeah, there's the chair going up. They've suddenly realised around here, they know that he's out. There are people up there on that hill raising their arms.
Watching it from the hill, I couldn't keep my eyes off it. And I think, as a nation, we probably held our breath as Stuart Diver was rescued.
3 days after the disaster, Stuart Diver was pulled from the wreckage and debris. He'd been trapped in a confined space, helpless and pinned down, next to his wife Sally, who had tragically died in the accident.
She was screaming, and then I heard the water coming. 25 seconds in, water came. Within 5 seconds, she was drowned.
It really is one of the most incredible visual experiences you'll ever see on Australian television.
You know that if you were sitting at home, you wouldn't be able to leave the television set. It was like September 11.
When I was down there, I was thinking, you've killed my wife, the most precious thing to me in the world, so you're not going to get me.
And with that, we come to number 1. At Gallipoli, Australian and New Zealand soldiers came together in discipline, courage, endurance and mateship, the qualities that became known as the Anzac spirit.
On April 25, 1915, Australian and New Zealand soldiers, under orders from London, took part in a disastrous landing at Gallipoli on the western coast of Turkey. The troops made their landing at the wrong position and, as a result, faced impossibly steep cliffs and barrage after barrage of enemy fire.
When Gallipoli took place, this country was 14 or 15 years old. We were a collection of colonies that had come together as the Commonwealth of Australia and really didn't have all that much to bind us together. We were looking for a defining national story, and it happened at Gallipoli.
These blokes, they blew a whistle and these blokes went up over a trench and walked straight into machine gun fire. Now, I don't know whether that's makes the man, but I don't know if I'd have the courage to do that. That's just guts.
It was the iconic Australian battle because it was the first time we went to war as a nation. Our diggers, they were Australian diggers. We'd cut our ties to the motherland and we acquitted ourselves brilliantly in an unwinnable battle.
The amount of men we lost, and we took a whole generation of young men away. That's a massive contribution that we made.
I've been to Gallipoli, but not as a reporter. I've been there with my wife Lee on a private visit, and we were both overcome. I remember standing at Lone Pine and crying for these dead Australians.
Anzac and Gallipoli have become our defining national story. Captain Cook didn't discover this country. Australia was discovered at Gallipoli. We became a nation at Gallipoli.
Lest we forget. Well, thanks for joining us tonight on 20 to 1. Join us next week when we count down 20 moments of madness. Good night.
Next week on 20 to 1.
He's exploiting this baby for entertainment purposes.
This is not a bloke who lives his life with his finger firmly planted on the control button.
I would have charged him.
So did you have a good time with those hookers last night?
I did.
I mean, please, and come here, smack, smack, smack.
He wouldn't be the first man that's been caught with his pants down, would he?
Do you think women really want to look at male nudes?